Hey everybody, OperationZ here, and we're on Joseph's story, part 3. And we pick up where we leave off in part 2, where, we see all these things happen. We know that basically from where Jacob favors and loves Joseph more than all his brethren, that they pick up and see all these cues that, is just given, that they see that Joseph is loved more and he's just elevated above all his brethren. So naturally, they're very jealous and envious of their brother Joseph, and we have that, and, we see that, but it's not only that, he has these dreams, and these dreams exalt him above all his brethren and even over his own father, that Joseph has this dream and, another dream as well, that it just basically, exalts him above all them. And where there was tension and they envied him, his brethren ended up just straight up hating him after that. And Jacob rebukes Joseph because of his dreams, but at the same time, afterwards, it says, but his father observed the saying. And he observes the saying because he knows that, dreams can have meaning because God communicated with him through dreams on a couple occasions. And he knew them to be prophetical dreams. So we have that. And then we have that also, these dreams of Joseph's, we see that they do come true and unfold. And I won't go over how exactly they do, but, we'll just work our way there. But they are prophetical dreams, or prophetic dreams, I should say. And, it's just noteworthy here to just see everything that takes place right here, and then how it all unfolds and all takes place just as the dreams symbolize and predict that they will. But we are in Genesis chapter 37, verse 13, which I ended up reading in part 2, but I'm going to reread it again because I was supposed to here. And Israel said unto Joseph, do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said to him, here am I. He says, Father, here I am. They're all extremely angry with me, and they envy me and all these things, and they have all these, basically just all this tension. But he said, yet here I am, and I will go to my brethren who are in Shechem because you send me. Because he's faithfully and obediently listening to his father and obeying his instructions for him. That even though it's probably so tense around his brothers that you couldn't cut that tension in the area that they'd be in with a knife. It's so tense for them and just so hostile, and it doesn't talk completely about it, but they probably, like, it was just very tense. And it says they were angry with him and they envied him. And, we can only imagine what that must have looked like for Joseph. Just, again, telling what his dreams were. And on top of that, not only telling what his dreams were, but, pretty much also just, doing what his father had for him to do. And, We see it on Jacob's part that he shouldn't have put so much love upon Joseph more than all of his other brethren, and like again, Reuben should have been seen as pretty much the firstborn, just the way that they would be concerning that. Like being the firstborn, the birthright supposed to be his, and so on and so forth. And see, and in this case, it's not like the previous uh, situations where Abraham passed his blessing on to Isaac, and Isaac passed his blessing on to Jacob, right? And all that stuff that happened. Well, actually, what happened with Jacob and Esau's story is a little different than that, but we're not talking about that here. But they pass this blessing down, and in this case, they all get their own special, unique blessing because they're the direct patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel, and pretty much all the the tribes and where they were at and all that stuff. We just see that pretty much we see that they all have that blessing, but he just Reuben should have had more rights with the way that their culture is than Joseph. But the way he was looking at it, he saw Jacob saw Joseph as more like his firstborn because he was Rachel's firstborn son, even though all his other brethren, other than Benjamin, are older than him. And, that's just what's to take note of here. So he goes to Shechem like his father tells him to do. Genesis chapter 13, verse 14. And he said to him, Go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. So, we see that pretty much go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. So where they were at, he went to Shechem, which is what we gather from what the text says there. And Genesis chapter 37, verse 15, And a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field, and the man asked him, saying, What seekest thou? So this is just a very mysterious thing, right? That this stranger, this man, was just there wandering in the field, in the middle of nowhere, right? And, he's just this man that was there because his brethren relocated and went somewhere else, and it would have actually been better if we look at it in that right here and now sense for Joseph that he didn't come upon his brethren out of the way of their father, them being jealous and angry and all these influences and manners of spirit that was upon the brethren because of Joseph, and this situation that was with Joseph. And, we see that, and it's just pretty much, it would have been better for him not to find him. But yet, here this man is, this mysterious man, just wandering around out in the field, and we're going to see what he says. So, Genesis chapter 37, verse 16, And he said, I seek my brethren, tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks. So he's saying, I'm trying to find my brothers. I'm trying to see where they're at. Like, where are they feeding the sheep and the goats and all that? Like, where are they at? So that way I can basically go and he wants to go there and just be there with his brethren because that's what his father gave him to do. And Genesis chapter 37, verse 17, and the man said, They are departed hence, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brethren and found them in Dothan. So they left Shechem, and for whatever reason that they might have went, they didn't exactly specify why they relocated. And it could have been that they relocated to Dothan because they knew their father would send them to report on them, and they're very angry and annoyed and jealous of their brother that they just figured, well, we'll make it so he can't find us and we'll go to Dothan. But yet here this mysterious man is, and he could have been just some man that happened to be there and whatnot, or it could have even been an angel directing him to what would ultimately be his destiny to happen. Again, going through those hard, harsh trials that he had to face and undergo. But, to his destiny of what he becomes later on, to prepare him. And, that could have been an angel directing him and negating the will of his brethren to avoid him. And that's just a theory that, it could be, or it could just be they went for a different reason too. But it's also, why would they relocate though? Like, why would they go from Shechem to Dothan in a completely different way? And, one of the biggest things come to mind is just so that they wouldn't have to deal with Joseph. But it doesn't say that for sure in the text. We can only kind of speculate. And right here, Genesis chapter 37, verse 18, and when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. So again, it would have been a lot better had he not found them, because their intentions out in the middle of the wilderness was to say, basically was to, they were going to slay their brother right there out in the middle of, where they're at, in the middle of Dothan, and God has a different plan for Joseph, that their intentions don't come about, and it ends up going God's way and a part of God's plan. And we see all these things, right, that we see it'll go God's way, that doesn't happen, and there's peace, and like, not necessarily peace, but better than the alternative, that takes place, and the way God intends is greater, God having a stronger and mightier hand than Joseph's brethren. And his fate wasn't sealed with his brother's wrath and jealousy, but it was under the influence of God's almighty hand. And what we can see from the text, is we see, like how they're shepherds, right? We see these symbolic meanings with the shepherds tending and watching and guarding the flocks against things like wolves and all these dangers that would endanger the flock. We see God watching over and tending to his people, watching over Joseph, and just what Joseph would have faced, but we see how divine intervention happened And God was right there protecting Joseph behind the scenes, behind the scenes. And again, you know, Joseph in the text, what's noteworthy here, like when he said these things, he probably didn't realize completely how arrogant it might have sounded, because he's 17 in this text. He's younger and whatnot, and we see that, and he just doesn't realize how it sounds. He's just telling the dreams he had, and he didn't anticipate the outcome of what those that heard it, his brethren, how they would take it and how they would perceive it. So, it just is something that ended up happening. And, here they are pretty much, we can tell that they're very angry at Joseph, and that's just part of the story that with what happens as we move on here. But God ends up providing you know, a, a refuge in the midst of a storm, so to speak, that he has a shelter, and that pretty much where their fierce wrath is upon him, yet also the peace of God is surrounding him, and behind the scenes, God's working in his favor, and God's always doing that in our lives, and we take it on faith upon these things, right? But the thing is, God's always doing things behind the scenes, like he's arranging this and arranging that, for your benefit and for your good, because that's the God that we worship and the God that we serve. We have a great, wonderful, and good, powerful God, and there's just so much to love God for that, we can spend hours just talking about that. But we'll talk about what we see from the text as we go along. There's just so much that we can get from it, and just when you get to thinking about God, it'll stir up your zeal, and you just see everything that God does and everything that he can do, and it's just easy to be awestruck by these things. But that's the story for today, and you all have a blessed day.